Over
Okay.
to you, Paul. Yeah.
Thank you, Declan. Morning, everybody. Great to get the opportunity to talk to you again. We've a fair bit to cover, so I'm gonna jump pretty much straight into it, if that's okay. That's a welcome back and great to get to talk to you again. So, in the interest of time, what I'm going to do is this. Well, first of all, for the next 45 minutes, what we'll do is we will go through the mock paper, which hopefully most of you have had a chance to at least have a bit of a look at. If you've had a chance to attempt it, all the better. But hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at it. We'll do that for about 35 minutes. That kind of only gives us kind of 4 or 5 minutes per question. So we'll go at a reasonable pace. And then what we'll do is we'll spend the last 10 minutes, we'll put the mock paper away and we'll talk about the real exam, because I can give you some indications. There's obviously quite a lot of material. I'll give you a bit of indications as to what to focus on and what your options might be in relation to it. Okay. So that's the first thing to cover off. The second thing to say is in relation to the mock paper, as Martin just mentioned, there is a short section at the beginning. I'm not going to spend time on that. Okay, I'll just email you out the answers. Okay, from the mock paper. Okay, and if you have any questions on it, you're welcome to come back to me on it. Okay. So that's what we'll do for the short one. And then the very last question is on enforcing legal judgments in 3 different jurisdictions. So we could actually spend probably a full 45 minutes on that alone. So I'm going to tell you where to get the information on that, but I'm not going to spend much time specifically on that question. Okay. And that exact question is not copied in the exam in any case. Okay. There is something in that section, but it's not the same one. So okay, so that's what we'll do. Hopefully that's okay with you all. I'll jump straight in, and I'll talk about the first long question in section B that we have on international. So the nice short question. First question is, outline the benefits for firms engaging in international trade. Okay, nice and straightforward and pretty short. Okay, the answers to that question are to be found in module 1, and they're on pages 20 to 24. Okay, that's where you find pages 20 to 24. That's where you find the answers to module 1. And I believe the title of the section is "Why Do Firms Internationalize?" So not quite the same wording, but very, very similar. Okay. And the type of answers that we're looking for are these. Okay, so there's a number of reasons why firms would engage in international trade. First one would be to seek opportunities for growth by diversifying into international markets. Okay, so growth has slowed down for a particular product in your own home country, and you may have identified other countries where there is opportunities for more growth. So you diversify and you start putting more of your focus into a different country and try to sell your product there. Obviously, not too surprisingly, the second one is higher margins or profits. Okay, so basically money. Okay, so it might be that you have a fairly competitive market in your home country, and as a result, you have to maybe keep your price as low as you possibly can. In other countries, there may not be the same level of competition, so as a result, you can charge a bit more money and make a bit. You charge a bit more money, and as a result, make a bit more money. The third reason why firms would internationalize is because their key customers have done so. Okay, so years ago, I worked on a key account for Accenture. The client sent their #1 guy over to work on the west coast of the US, okay, which is where their headquarters are based. And what did Accenture do? They advertised and identified somebody and sent them over to the west coast of America so that they would be basically following that person around and seeking out opportunities for growth between our 2 companies. Okay, so if a key customer relocates abroad, it is not unheard of for companies who maybe are heavily dependent on that key customer for their revenue to do the same. Another reason would be to be closer to supply sources. Okay, so if your raw materials, for instance, are 1,000 miles from where you are creating your end product, it can sometimes be beneficial to go over there, set up an operation, and maybe develop your final product a lot closer, 5 miles down the road, say, from wherever it is, from whatever raw materials you're actually sourcing. Okay, that can work out cheaper, it can work out more efficient, and potentially you can pass it on to your customers or make higher profits. There's a number of different positives can come from that. But moving closer to your supply sources is a key reason why companies internationalize. Gain access to lower cost or better value factors of production. Okay, so that's another one. Not too surprising. I mean, that's probably the one, if you stop somebody on the street, that they'll probably say is the number one reason that companies do it. I mean, a lot of multinational companies will set up their operations in more low-cost locations if they have the opportunity to do so, okay, because the wages are lower, so they can maybe have 2 or 3 people working on a job for the same price of one person in a more higher cost location. But the reverse also applies. Sometimes people will go international because it's an opportunity to gain investment for their products. Okay, so I mean, if you think of an Irish company, the number of people or organizations that you might be able to reach out to for investment in Ireland might be limited. If you go off to America, there are thousands of millionaires, or probably hundreds of billionaires, and many very valuable companies, all of whom you could potentially reach out to for investment in your product. So that is another reason why you might do it. Okay. Develop economies of scale is another one. Okay, so it can be that manufacturing 10,000 units is only a little bit more expensive than manufacturing 100 units. So that may be another reason why you might go international. Okay, there's only so many people in Ireland, for instance. There's only so many people you can supply to. But if all of your investment has been creating your product and then actually manufacturing it is very cheap, you might well say, well, why would we limit ourselves just to Ireland? Let's throw our net wider and let's do all of Europe. You know, and it might be that you'll make an awful lot more money doing that. So a lot of it obviously always keeps coming back to money. Last couple of reasons why you might go international. One is to confront an international competitor. So if your competition, in the same way that your client goes abroad, if your competitor goes abroad, you might say, well, jeepers, we better get into that market as well, because otherwise they're going to gobble things up. And if your competitors become extremely profitable and extremely wealthy, you know, they can potentially squeeze you out of the market back home as well. So you may want to, if they're a major player in another market, you probably want to be as well. And then finally, there might be an opportunity. You may want to invest with a potentially rewarding relationship with a foreign partner. You might find out this is a partner in a different part of the world who's maybe involved with a similar part of business or has skills that will complement yours, and you can potentially work with them, and both of you can make a lot of money. So there's a lot in that, and as Martin alluded to, it's probably a good opportunity for me to make the first point. What we're looking for with your answers is, can you explain what the answers are? So I've tried to give maybe a very quick, I mean, I appreciate it's in a little bit whistle stop, but I've tried to give a quick example of each of those as I've been going along. If you're able to do the same as part of your answer, then your opportunity for good marks is pretty good. What we're looking for is that you show you understand it, and ideally you back it up with a quick example, rather than just go to the notes and say, okay, there's the section of the notes that Paul was talking about. There's page 24, we do a copy paste and we bang it in. You're not going to score well if that's the approach. Any questions on the first question?
Yeah, Paul, I just have a question. At the start, you know, when it says questions to be answered in around 300 to 800 words, is that per question or is that for the whole lot?
That would be per question.
Okay. Yeah.
So I mean, as a guide, I mean, I just actually had a quick look just before I logged on, so I saw that kind of little note, and I said, well, how long is that in pages? So when I type, I probably type about 400 words into a page. Okay, so that give you some sort of guidance. So you're kind of talking between 1 to 2 pages per question. The really strong answers frequently drift more towards the 2 pages mark. But that said, it's quality, not quantity. If you cover off all your points and you have a good example, and I say, yeah, good example, and it's only a page long, you can still score well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, great. All right, we'll move on to question 2. So question 2 is also from module 1, and this one is, explain the risks in international business and what you can do to minimize them. Okay, so the answers to this question, it appears in 2 different parts. The first part that you would want to read up on if you're answering that question would be pages 14 to 16 in module 1, so just slightly earlier in module 1 than the first question. And then there's also more detail covered in pages 10 to 12 of module 3. Okay. 10 to 12 of module 3 also gives you some additional information that you can share on this, okay? So the 4 risks are cross-cultural risk, So we'll go through each of these in a minute. It's cross-cultural risk, country risk, currency risk, and commercial risk. Okay. So first of all, to explain what each of those are, cross-cultural risk is essentially that you misunderstand the culture of the country that you're working in, either, which would have two impacts. One, it can impact on your relationship with your colleagues, and two, even more importantly, it can impact on your relationship with your customers. So if you completely misunderstand the way that a country operates, you are likely to suffer from cross-cultural risk, and your profits are likely to be significantly less. Okay, and the way we combat that is just as a very initial way of doing it is you would need to read module 2 and most of module 3, because that gives you some good indications as to how you would work in many of the larger countries in the world. Okay, so the first way to alleviate cross-cultural risk is to read module 2 and most of module 3, where you'll get good ideas where there operates a very large chunk of the population of the world. It would be covered in those 2 modules. Okay. The second one is country risk. Okay. So that almost would probably be the first one that come to mind for me if I was looking to go somewhere that maybe I wasn't overly familiar with. So that is country risk. Okay, so what are your risks in terms of a country? The first and most clearly and easily to identify is security. Okay, is the country that you're going to do business in safe? Okay, or is there a widespread law and order issue, or is there even a war taking place in the country that you're involved in? So that's an example of country risk. But there's more beyond that. Even if the country's safe, you have to ask yourself, okay, well, what is the legal kind of setup in the country? Okay, if you invest a lot of money in your country, if you lend, if you supply a product or service that clocks up bills of maybe $1 million, and then your customers fails to pay, do you have the legal support in that country to allow you to enforce that debt and get at least a portion of your $1 million back? Political risk is another one. The country might be stable now, but if there's elections coming up, in some countries elections pass off very peacefully. In other countries, there can be a lot of turmoil in the lead up to or after the election if large chunks of the population don't recognize the result or don't like the result. Okay. And then another example would be economic environment. Okay, I mean, the country might be very safe, politically it might be reasonably okay, but the economics mightn't be very good. If the exchange rate is very volatile between the currency in that country and the euro or the dollar that you might be dealing in, that's another thing to take into consideration. So country risk is the second one of the risks that we're talking about. Okay. Leading on from that, the third one is currency risk. Okay, so that's a narrower one, but it's essentially what are the fluctuations between the exchange rates. Okay, is there a danger that if you give 90-day credit terms, that the value of the deal that you have done is worth significantly less in 90 days time when it comes to collecting the money than it is today? Okay, in more stable economies, that's less likely to happen. In more volatile economies, that is quite likely to happen. So you need to build, that is a risk in doing business internationally. And then finally, the last one is one that is not just limited to international, but it is also very much prevalent at home. That's known as commercial risk. Okay, you've picked the wrong manager to run your business. You picked the wrong manager to run your business. You have picked the wrong product. You've priced it incorrectly. You've marketed it incorrectly. You've targeted the wrong population. It might suit an older person and you've gone and tried to sell it to young people. All of those are examples of commercial risk and things that can go wrong both in Ireland but also abroad. But a key thing to keep in mind in terms of doing business abroad is, in the US, for instance, if you pick the wrong manager, you can sack him or her pretty easily. Okay, it is not hard to fire someone in America. If you hire someone with the same responsibility, even just in Ireland, never mind anywhere else in Europe, they are entitled to a lot more rights than they would be in the US. Okay, it is not as easy as just go into a room and just do a kind of Donald Trump on it and kind of say, right, you're gone. Okay. So those are the 4 risks of doing business internationally. How do you minimize them? As we're saying, for cross-cultural ones, to start with, read module 2 and most of module 3. The practices that you can adapt is that you can engage in is you can accept the differences. You can adapt. So you can say, I mean, the key example, excuse me, of adapting is that, you know, in the Western world, the world is a little bit more focused on me. Okay, how much money can I get? Okay, in more Eastern countries, there is a bit more value associated in the community. Okay, it's not just about you getting rich; it's about maybe a rising tide lifting all boats type approach. Okay, and you can maybe combine the two. Okay, there's nothing to say you can't do both if you move into an economy where that might be a country where that might be valued. Okay, or you can simply adopt it. You can say, okay, right, forget about me. We're just going to do an entire rising tide lifts all boats type approach. Singapore is a very good example of that. They have just basically had a look and said, right, what's a good way of making money? And they've come up with a model themselves, and they have launched into the country, and they have become a very successful economy as a result. Okay, so cross-cultural, that is a way of dealing with it. Currency risk, there's a number of different ways you can do with it. You can fix the company rates for the currency. Sorry, you can fix the rate for the currency at the beginning. So you can say this is what the value is going to be. You can do a spot rate, so you can pass the risk on to the bank. Okay, so you can agree with the bank that this is the rate that the exchange rate that's going to be employed in 90 days time. If you're a big company, you can maybe have a number of different bank accounts. So you can have a Euro bank account, a US dollar bank account. So you can ask the customer to pay into a particular bank account, and then you just leave it in the bank account. You don't convert it into euros or into dollars or anything else. You'd leave it there until the exchange rate is more favorable, and then you move it around. So only then. Or the last thing you can simply do is you can say, you know, it's maybe no more than one line in the contract. The currency that we're going to use is euro. Okay, so there is no exchange rate, even if their currency is not euro. You say, right, you're going to pay in euro, so the risk is essentially passed on to the customer rather than to you. And then finally, I mean, if we just combine the country and the commercial risks together for the sake of time, for me, the key thing on those ones is research. Okay, if you need to find out, don't go into a country and then find out it's dangerous. You should know beforehand. Okay, research it. Okay, on the commercial risk, you know, in the same way that you have to research everything in Ireland to say, well, what's the right price? What are the competitors charging? Who are they selling to? You know, if you're doing all that research in Ireland, you would need to do the same if you're going to do business in a different country. Okay, so plenty of stuff to write about. You probably won't even get all of that into your answer, but plenty of stuff you can potentially write about there. So 4 risks, we've covered them off, how to mitigate them, and we've explained each one. That would be what we'd be looking for in the event the question 2 were to appear on the real exam. Any questions on that? So question 3, as I said, there's a lot in this, but so we'll go through it as methodically as we can. Question 3, what are the main factors to take into account when dealing with people in different countries? Okay, so we've left module 1. Module 1 appeared in question 1 and question 2. We've left module 1 behind. We're now onto module 2, and the large portion of module 3 as well. So if you go through module 2 or module 3, what you will see is, you know, you'll see a country, say the US, okay, and they will say, underneath the US, you will see a number of subheadings under it, okay? It's the subheadings that we're looking for as part of the answer, okay? The topics that we've covered off throughout those countries are greetings, okay? So in some countries, it's a handshake. In some cases, it's a kiss on the cheek. In some cases, it's bowing. You know, if you do the wrong thing in the wrong country, you're off to a bad start already, okay? Basic etiquette is included there. So each one has a topic on basic etiquette, which is, it's either called basic etiquette or called do's and don'ts. Okay, there's a number of things, for instance, not to mention, certainly until you know the people that you're dealing with in the country well. There is communication, and there's 2 subheadings within communication. There's verbal communication, okay, so how people's tone differs from country to country, how the pitch of their voice or the level of their voice, loud versus soft and so on, how that might be read. But there's also non-verbal communication. We discussed things like personal distance. I mean, that came up in some of the short tests. Eye contact was definitely a couple of questions on that in the short test, but also things like smiling, silence, laughter. Laughter in some countries is very much appropriate and even helpful. In other countries, it may immediately be taken as a sign of offense. We also have big sections on meetings. Okay, so if you're conducting the meeting in a particular country, how do you go about it? how to do phone calls, be they business phone calls or collections phone calls within the country, and also relationships. Okay, what happens kind of after the meeting? Okay, can you expect that you become a lifelong friend with the people that you've met in the meeting, or can you expect that the meeting is done and dusted and you all go your separate ways? Okay, so there's a and how to handle things like dinners and drinks and family barbecues and things like that. Are they important or are they not important in the particular country? Okay, so each of the, so we've a lot of countries listed. Then the subheadings under it. The subheadings are greetings, basic etiquette / do's and don'ts, verbal communication, non-verbal communication, meetings, phone calls, and relationships. Okay, and what we're looking for to score well, there will definitely be some version of that in the main exam. Okay, at least one question. Okay, and what we are looking for is examples. Okay, and the best way to do it is not to regurgitate the examples that are in the notes. Come up with examples of your own. Okay, this may sound like a strange thing to say, but I would approach this exam almost like you would an interview. Okay, if you're going for an interview, you know, you can kind of guess, you'll get some sort of question of, well, tell me about a time you were proactive, or tell me about a time you worked with people, or something like that. Ideally, you would have, you know, going into the interview, ideally you would have an example of when you were proactive or when you worked with people or something like that. You want to do the same in this. Okay, doesn't have to be an example of your own. Okay, it doesn't need to be, this is an experience I had in America. Don't need to do that, but just come up with some example, and ideally one not from the notes. Okay, either one that you saw about, or you heard about, or you can even, if you want to, just bang them into Google or something like that. You know, you can do a little bit of research and get them. But I think if you were to do that and you put them on the paper, you're going to score pretty well. Okay. So that's question 3. Any questions for me on question 3? Okay. Question 4.
Sorry,
yes.
sorry, Paul.
Aidan, how are you?
With regards to question 3, are you looking for a number of examples, kind of comparisons between countries? So, say, for instance, meeting and greeting in the US, where people would be likely to brag about themselves, talk about their achievements, make themselves feel very good about it, whereas opposed to, say, in China, that would be regarded as vulgar or kind of inappropriate.
It's an excellent example, yeah. If you can get them in, I mean, you are under the clock a little bit, but if you can get them in, and I recognize that. Okay, so it's not that you're kind of sweating away and typing and you're saying, and then I kind of read it back and say, oh, they left out all that stuff. You know, I recognize you're under the clock. Okay, yep. So if you can get that in, all the better. If you can't squeeze it in, and all you can maybe do is mention one half of the example, just on the US, for instance, then that's okay as well. So the US is good. If you can put the both in, even better.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yep, no worries. Any further questions on question 3? No. Okay, perfect. Okay. So question 4. What are the main differences on how a meeting would be conducted in 5 countries of your choice? Okay, so again, not too surprisingly, where you get this answer is module 2 and most of module 3. Okay, so in the previous question, what we were looking for was all of the subheadings, so the greetings and the verbal communication and the non-verbal communication. That's what we were looking for. Here, what we've done is we've zeroed in under one of those headings, which was meetings, but it's one of the most important ones. It's one of the ones where you have the most examples. So within that particular subheading, you again have a number of different subheadings, I suppose, that are in there. So let's just quickly go through what they would be. Okay, punctuality would obviously be one. Okay, if the meeting starts at 9 o'clock and you arrive at 9 o'clock, are you going to be there on your own, and people will gradually drift in 10 past, quarter past, 20 past, or is it a case of 9 o'clock is 9 o'clock and the expectation is that at 9:01 we kick off the meeting? Okay, so how will punctuality be viewed in 5 different countries of your choice? How formal or informal will the meeting be? Okay, so in certain countries, call that in the notes, the meetings are likely to be very formal. In others, they'll be a little bit more casual. You know, in the US, for instance, punctuality might be very important, but at the same time, there might be a little bit of a casualness to it. At the same time, not too casual, because there is an expression in the US that time is money. How do you handle greetings and introductions? Okay, so there's different examples. You know, in the example that Aidan just gave, if you hold back in a US meeting, people are going to assume you haven't done anything. So you need to, when you're introducing yourself, you need to be saying, you know, I have this company and that company, and I'm worth kind of 10 million and so on. So you know that would be kind of expected in the US, and that's what's called out. In China, that would probably come across as rather rude. So, you know, how do you handle your greetings and introductions? You know, just doing it in some sort of order in the US would be perfectly acceptable. In other countries, it would be done in terms of seniority. Okay, you would be talking either about the most senior person in the room by level or the most senior person in the room by age. You'd start with that and work your way down. Okay. How do you handle business cards? There was at least 1 or 2 questions on that in the short tests. Okay, so you could talk about that. How do you handle small talk? Is the expectation in some countries would be that at 9 o'clock you start talking, you start covering off the reasons that you're there, versus in other countries, doing that would be seen as skipping over any sort of building of relationships. So it might only be 10, half 10 before you talk about anything business wise. How you introduce yourself. So again, a good talking point is do you share your successes or not? And then how do you handle disagreements and objections? Because they will come up in meetings, you won't always agree, and what is the best way around them? Okay, so most, if not all, of the sections will have covered each of those individual topics. Okay, so what we're looking for you to do is pick 5 of them and go through them, and again, show you understand by sharing examples. And if you can make the examples more your own rather than what's in the notes, then all the better. Okay, so that would get us to the halfway mark. That's 4 of the 8 questions done. Any questions on that? No? Okay. So question 5, reasonably short question in terms of what is actually in the question, but this is out of all of them, this is the longer answer. So I'm not going to go through it all, but I'll give you a couple of examples. So question is, write a note on 10 separate risk criteria to be included in your operational risk model. Okay. Now you just need to be a little bit careful on this, because that's slightly different to the earlier question, which is, okay, what are the 4 risks of doing international business? This is in your operational risk model. This is in module 3. It's towards the end of it, and it's covered in pages 67, 68, and 69. Okay, so it's in module 3. Okay, and it basically covers off all of the subheadings under country risk. So I gave you a couple of examples of them earlier. Okay, how safe is the country? Okay, that needs to be factored into your operational risk model. The political stability, how easy is the handover of power? Is it done smoothly, or will it be done with an element of turmoil on the streets? You also need to keep in mind, in terms of political stability, how different are the political parties in that country, okay? And how likely is it that somebody completely different gets into power, okay? So some of them might be very pro-business and very pro-international investment. Some of them might be very much, no, keep the money in the country. All government contracts will go to local companies, and you need to keep that in mind, okay? If there's a strong possibility of somebody else getting into power who will not be pro-international business, you need to keep that in mind, okay? How effective is the government? The legal relationships that I mentioned before, which is, can you enforce the contract? The macroeconomic risks, which is, what's the likelihood of a recession? Is the economy growing or shrinking? That then leads on to the next one, which is trade and payment issues, which is okay, what is the exchange rate going to be worth when it comes to collecting the money? One that I have seen myself before in certain countries is there will be limits on how much money can leave the country on any one day. Okay, so we've had scenarios before where we've had 1 million or more outstanding in a country, and we're able to talk to the customer, but they say, but there's a rule at the moment that we can only transfer no more than 10,000 out of the country on any one day. And you have to wait, and they do it, and 10,000 rise in a Monday, and then 10 on Tuesday, and 10 on Wednesday. But obviously that makes it an awful lot longer for you to get paid. Okay, so you need to take that into account in your risk model. Labor markets, how strong are the unions? Tax policy, financial risks, and then also local infrastructure. Okay, there are some parts of the world where broadband works 99.999% of the time. There are other parts of the world, maybe even other parts of this country, where it does not work as reliably as that. You need to factor that in. There's no point in having a big kind of operation set up and then having the broadband go down every once or twice a day. Okay, it's going to cause problems. Okay, so all of that is an awful lot of it. So I'm not going to go into any further detail than that, but you need to build 10 different things into your risk model. Those are a number of different examples of each of the categories. Okay, so again, not copy paste. It's obviously the headings, yeah, you will need to copy paste. There's no getting around that. But in terms of the examples and explaining it in your own words rather than what's in the notes. Okay. Any questions on that rather long one? No? Okay. So question 6 is explain with examples the effect foreign exchange risk can have on transactions over time. Okay, so the answer to this question is in module 3. So again, towards the end, it's on page 71 and 72. Okay, and this is the one where I'm going to just quickly share my screen, if I remember how to do it. Right, and hopefully maybe somebody who are on camera might give you a quick nod. Claire, that thumbs up. Thanks, Claire. Thank you. Okay. So this is in the notes. Okay, I've added 1 or 2 little bits of notes to it, but essentially this is all in the notes. Okay, so you can find that if you can go through it. And I think it was, what was I said, page 70, 71, 72. So the example is if you buy 1,000 items for 20 euros to be delivered next month, if the exchange rate on the dollar is 91 cents, the $20,000 worth of goods will cost you 18,200. Okay, so that's your outlay. That's the money that goes out of your bank account when you buy the goods. Okay, and you're now going to try and sell them on. Okay, however, if the dollar strengthens and is now worth 97 cents, the price of the goods increases to 19,400. Okay, all right, so that's now what's going to cost you. Okay, if you add 5% profit margin and sell the goods for 19,110. Okay, so that's 5% profit margin on your 18.2. Okay, so it's not on the 19,400, it's on the 19.2. You're going to lose 290 euro in the transaction because you will be taking in 19,110 euro, but you have spent 19,400. Okay, so that's what happens if the dollar goes up to 97. So at this point, if you haven't read the section in any detail, you might be slightly confused, but it becomes a little bit clearer when you move on to the second part of the example. So this is where the reverse applies. So if the rate of the dollar is only worth 85 cents, the price of the goods in the euro falls to 17,000. So that's what you're going to spend instead. Okay, you were spending 17,000, not the 18,200 that we spent earlier in the example. Okay. If you add 5% profit margin and sell the goods for 19,110, so that's the same as earlier, you're going to make a profit of, so you've paid out 19,000, you have taken in, sorry, you paid out 17,000, you have taken in 19,110, your profit now is 2,110. So the only thing that's changed there is the exchange rate. Everything else is the same. Okay, so that is an example of what it is that you can actually do. So that example is in the is in the notes. What you might consider doing, I mean, you can decide this yourself when I go through what's on the real exam as to whether or not you think it's time well spent. But what you could do is you could take out that example and just make a couple of minor changes to the prices, just work out your calculation. I wouldn't go anything too dramatic, but a couple of minor changes to it. And you could use that example. And if you've written it yourself, there's nothing, if that comes up, there's nothing wrong with you just doing a copy paste and pumping it into me. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing in a minute, but before I do, any questions on that? You've gone from 97 cents. 97 cents is in the first example, so you lose money there. If the exchange rate is only 85 cents, your quid's in. You're making what, over a 10% profit. 10% profit. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. But if any questions, I'm conscious that's one that you'd be most likely to maybe have questions on later. So if there's anything on it that if you look at it later, if it kind of makes sense now, we look at it later and then you say, oh, now I don't understand this, do contact me. I'm this week might be a little bit busy because all of your assignments all going well are coming in. But certainly before the exam, I'll have an opportunity to go through it with you. Okay. Now, again, I mentioned this earlier. What can you do to mitigate that? There's basically 4 examples. One, you can fix the rate. Okay. So you agree with the company that this is the rate that we're going to do business with. So it doesn't matter what happens on the exchange markets. In the meantime, this is where we're going to do it. 2, you can do a spot rate. Okay. So you can arrange for the bank that a certain value will be applied on a particular day. So you say, we're going to get money in on, I don't know, say the 25th of August, and I need it to be this amount of money. So you agree that with the bank. Okay. That's the second way of doing it. Third way, if you're a big company, which some of the companies that I've dealt with have been, because I've seen them do this before, you have a number of different bank accounts. So it doesn't really matter on a particular day what the value is. If the agreement is $1 million, $1 million will go into your USD bank account and it will be worth $1 million. And then if you want to move it somewhere else, you wait until the exchange rate is more favorable. And then the last way you can do it is you say, okay, by the way, and certainly if you're the bigger of the 2 companies, you can maybe do this. By the way, our currency is euro. You're going to pay us in euro. Okay. That means if their currency is not euro, they're the ones that take the risk, not you. Okay, any questions on that before we move to number 7, which is the last one I'm going to deal with in any sort of detail? No? Okay. So question 7 is discuss the advantages and disadvantages of the 4 main collection options open to large multinational companies. Okay, so they are covered in pages 5 and 6 on module 4. Okay. And there's basically 4 options. This is basically asking you, okay, where are you going to put your collection? Like, you've gone international, where are you going to base your collections activities? Okay. And you have 4 options. You can either 1, base it in the customer's country. Okay. So you've spread out, you're now working in 10 different countries. You can put 1 or 2 or more collectors in each country. Okay. That's one option. 2, you can have a shared services center. So either Dublin or somewhere else, you put you put all of your collectors. So you've got your French team, your German team, your Italian team, your UK team. You have them all based in the one place. That's the second option. Third one is a bit of both. Okay, so maybe you have your shared service center based centrally somewhere, but then you also have maybe a collector or 2 on the ground in France, in UK, in Germany, and that person can travel for your key customers, can travel and do meetings with them maybe once or twice a year. In order to keep the relationship good and to keep you on the top of the payment list. And then the 4th option is you can outsource it to a third party. Okay. So there's advantages and disadvantages to each one. If you're going to do it in the customer's country, the advantages are local knowledge. Okay. So chances are if you hire a collector in France, that person is probably either going to be French or may have spent a lot of time in France. So their knowledge of the way things work in France and how to get things done in France may be pretty good. That person can go and visit customers, as I mentioned earlier. They can go and do coffees and lunches with the sales team, the marketing team, the operations team, which are all important relationships to build. So they can go and grease the wheels there. And then there's also less chance of cross-cultural risk, as I said earlier. They're like, there's a pretty good chance they're either French or essentially French. Okay, and French is just an example. Okay, now the disadvantages are it can be slower than sharing knowledge in a shared service model. So if you have 2 collectors in the UK, 2 in France, 2 in Spain, 2 in Italy, they may not meet that often. Okay, so if somebody comes up with a great idea to do things a bit better, you're relying more on conference calls and emails to probably anyway to share that knowledge. Whereas if they're all together, if the French team come up with something brilliant, you can maybe call together the German team, the Italian team, and say, hey, look what the French team have done, and let's roll it out into other teams as well. So knowledge sharing is a bit slower. Probably a bit less management support. Okay, the local collectors might report to somebody who's not the credit manager, or they might report to you. You might be the credit manager, but you might be centrally based in Dublin or another location. Okay, so the management support is not as hands-on. There might be less IT support. Okay, so if you're rolling out collections tools or credit management tools, a bit harder to do it into 10 different countries than it is into one shared service center. there's less synergy. Okay, so they're not necessarily going to get to know each other as well, and there's not really the savings on office space either, because you have to at least get them a desk in each place, or I suppose you could have them work from home, but you may, certainly in the old-fashioned model, you would have to get them a desk in an organization, or maybe even their own section. Okay. The shared service format, there is increased knowledge sharing. Okay, so things go a bit better. It's easier to do those things. There is additional management support, because you might not only have the credit manager, you might have IT support, and you might have, I mean, if the sales and the marketing teams and the operations teams are all centralized as well, you can all work with them as well. So and build the relationships here. So you've increased opportunities there. There's potential savings on office space. We only need to get one office in a central location, and you don't need to have one in Paris and one in Rome and one in Madrid and one somewhere else. It can go a bit better. There's greater team synergy. Okay, so the French team might get on better with the German collectors, and German collectors might get on well with the Italian collectors. You're not gonna have that as much if they're hundreds of thousands of miles apart. The disadvantages of shared service is you can't do customer visits as easily. If the sales and marketing teams are based locally, you're relying on the phone and conference calls, and maybe flying out every now and again, but you're not going to get to know them necessarily as well as if you're sitting next to them. Less local knowledge. Okay, so you may have you may not be you might be doing collections in France, but you might even never have been to France. And then there's increased possibility of cross-cultural risk. Okay, you're unlikely, unless you're a well-traveled manager or a well-traveled collector, you're not necessarily going to know all the ins and outs of, well, what are the Spanish like, what are the Italians like, what are the Germans like, what are the French like, and you can multiply that by a number of different ones. So in terms of I suppose just quickly, some conscious time is running out. If you combine the two approaches, things can be a bit more agile. Okay, so you can maybe have some collectors here and some collectors locally who can cover for one another when during holiday season or power outages or team events. I have found before there's a bit less team synergy, that when things go wrong, people in Dublin blame the people in France and vice versa. And it can be more costly, because you have to give them somewhere to sit in France and somewhere to sit in a shared service location as well. And then very quickly, just lastly on outsourcing, what are the advantages of outsourcing? You can offer the skills and support that may be lacking in smaller companies. So you can be experts in collections, even though there may be no experts in collections in a particular organization. It can be cost effective, because a lot of this outsourcing that I've been involved in is no win, no fee type things. So they get a percentage of what they collect. But the disadvantages are you lose the relationship with your customer, because you're handing over responsibility to somebody else who mightn't treat the customer as well as you do. Getting disputes resolved is harder, because there's extra handoffs. And then unless the staff are properly trained, if they've outsourced it out to maybe a place where they haven't trained the people or have put together that type of team, it's going to be a lot harder. Okay. So I appreciate there's been an awful lot to cover. We've kind of gone a little bit quickly, and I do want to jump into the main exams. So apologies to people for law who are already on. But the exam is obviously very important, so I'm going to go through that in a minute. But are there any questions on the exam? Sorry, on the mock exam.
The relief they must feel that when Chef Charlo Clark pokes his head in their door. Charlo is the executive chef at Our Lady's Hospice and has been good enough to join us here.
Sorry, the radio's on the background.
Okay, so the menu.
Thanks. So just very quickly before I go any further, just very lastly on the mock exam, there is one last question, which is question 8. That is covered off. It's a long one, so I'm not going to go through it. That is covered off on pages 19 to 42 of module 4. Okay, and you have 10 questions. There's 10 locations that you have good information there. The question there is write a note on the options open to you to enforce a judgment in 3 countries of your choice. I'm not going to go through it now. There are details as to how you do it in 10 different countries. They're on module 4, and it's pages 19 to 42. So the very key bit, so if you haven't been listening so far, I think it's safe to say you will listen now. So the real exam is as follows, okay? There are 100 marks, okay? And the first 25 go on the short questions, okay, which I'm going to email you out the answers to that once I've finished doing the law module, okay? So I'm going to send those out now. So that's 25 marks, and they're 25 very easy marks, okay? They're the easiest ones that you have in the exam, okay? Then you have 8 long questions, the same way you do in the mock exam, and there's 25 marks available for each of them as well, giving you 75 for them, plus your 25 for a total of 100, okay? So it's 3 of them, 25 marks for each of them, okay? And you need to do 3 of them. You can do more if you want. If you do more than 3, I will give you your top 3 marks, okay? Don't usually recommend it. A lot of people, there's always some people who do it, they do a 4th. Somebody I think once did about 7 of them, but I mean, she failed kind of 3 or 4 of them. So, on the questions. So, I mean, it wasn't necessarily time well spent, but you can do, I certainly would recommend doing any more than 4. And for most people who tend to score pretty well, 3 is enough. But if you feel you've got you've maybe hit a bit of a wall and hasn't really worked on one of the questions and you want to give another one a go, you can put a 4th one in, and I'll give you the marks for whichever the top 3 are. But in terms of what is going to be on it, it is this. So question 1 is from module 1. And it's very similar to a question on the mock paper. Okay, so if you know, I think 2 of them at the beginning were from module 1, if I remember correctly. So if you know those 2 from the mock paper, you're in pretty good shape. You're in pretty good shape to answer the first question. Okay, so knowing those 2 and having those 2 well prepared probably gives you the first question, puts the first question in the bag for you. Okay, question 2 is from module 1. And it's from early in module 1. Okay, so it's one of the first topics that's covered off in module 1. So I think you can take it from that. I can't remember exactly, but I think you can take it from that. It's either the first or the second topic that's covered off in module 1. There's a good bit in module 1, but that's where it comes from. It's early in module 1, so it's module 1, and it is early in module 1. So lo and behold, what I will tell you now is, if you know module 1 pretty well, that's potentially 2 out of your 3 questions answered, okay? So that's just something to keep in mind, okay? Question 3 is from modules 2 and 3, okay? So I think you can take it that it's something to do with the countries that are there. It is discuss how you would approach something differently in 5 countries to your choice. So again, if you think of the subheadings, there's the greetings, there's the phone calls, there's the verbal communication, the non-verbal communication, something like that is going to be in that question, okay? And you're going to say, okay, well, the differences between eye contact, I mean, it's probably not going to be, I don't know if it's going to be as specific as eye contact, but it'll be something like, it might be a broader term than that, but discuss how you're going to do something differently in 5 countries. It might be, well, in France, you do it this way, in Germany, you do it that way, in the US, you do it that way. So an explanation and examples of how you do something differently in 5 countries of your choice. Okay. So that's question 3. Question 4 is, again, it's from modules 2 and 3. So again, it's going to come from the countries that are listed there. And it's very similar to a question on the mock paper. So I think there's 2 or 3 of those questions that we've covered off this morning. One of those, very similar version of it, is going to appear on the paper itself. Okay. Okay. And guess what? Question 5 is very similar again. That's also modules 2 and 3, and it's discuss how you would approach something differently in 5 countries of your choice. So question 3 and question 5, in terms of the explanation, are exactly the same. So one of them might be, well, how would you do meetings in a country? I'm not saying that's what it is, but it might be, how do you do meetings in a country? The other one might be, how do you do collections calls in a country? The other one might be, how do you greet everybody in the country? How do you present yourself in the country? Something like that, okay? And if you know all of that pretty well, you can do question 3 and question 5, and you might even be able to do question 4 as well, which guess what, will give you all 3 of the questions that you need, okay? So a very good knowledge of module 2 and module 3 will cover 3 questions, okay? All right. Question 6 is from module 3. And this is after the sections where we've finished discussing the countries, okay? There's more in module 3 beyond that. When you get to the last country, there is some more stuff after that. That's where it comes from, okay? Not a huge amount more. There's a little bit more after that, but that's where it comes from, okay? So the last little couple of sections on module 3 will give you the information you need to answer question 6. Okay. And then for question 7 and question 8, they come from module 4. Okay. Now, in the mock paper, we skipped over it pretty much, but in the mock paper, the question was, well, how do you enforce judgments? Okay, that's the question of the mock paper. It's not that. Okay, so you can forget about that from the mock paper. Okay, it's one reason I didn't go into much detail in covering it. Okay, you can forget about that. It's something else from module 2, and it's worth 2 questions, not just 1. Okay, so I mean, just to recap, you could study module 4 and get 2 questions out of it. You could study module 1 and get 2 questions out of it. And you can study modules 2 and 3 and just go up to the end of the last country, and you can get 3 questions out of it. Now, that said, the thing to call out that is important to remember is you still have the short section, okay? So the short section covers modules 1 through 4. So you need to have a good working knowledge of all of those sections to answer those 4 questions well. But people tend to score well in that section, okay? It's not too difficult, okay? But just to keep that in mind, just in case you're tempted to do module 2 and 3 and completely forget about 1 and 4, you will need 1 and 4 at some point to do the short questions as well. So other than that, just one more time, it's not a scavenger hunt. Don't go and try and find the answers and just paste them in. That won't get you that far. It's stuff in your own words and examples to show that you understand what the material. That's what's going to get you the top marks. Okay. Declan, I'll hand it back to you for a minute.
Yeah, I'm here. Well done, Paul. Yeah, that was well covered, and I'm sure everybody is listening intently. And again, I'll send you a link to the recording of the thing. So if you want to revise it and go back over it, then by all means do. And again, if you have any questions, I know, Paul, you're around, we're around.
Yeah.
Over the next 2 weeks. So look, good luck with that, everybody. Hopefully now you're happier, you know what to expect. And we're all done now, so I'm just going to stop the recording of this.